Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amaduri, and I'm joined today with a brand new guest. We're going to talk about Austrian economics and libertarianism, sound money, and really just things that I'm very passionate about. And I really got involved with this back, especially seeing things unfold after the 2008 crisis, and a lot of my opinions really developed around that time regarding how I see the world and how I want to live my life. And today we're going to talk to someone about this. The brand new guest, Luis Fernando Mises, a student of Austrian economics, a statesman with the Libertarian Party, an entrepreneur, a curandero, and he's got a website, emancipatedhuman.com. His YouTube channel is also Emancipated Human, and he just interviewed John McAfee, founder of the antivirus company, and so really cool stuff. He's doing a lot of great things there. Luis, thanks for coming on the show with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Well, hey, look, I've been watching House of Cards now for some time, and I just got done listening to a friend of mine go down the list of how badly lobbyists control government. And we as Americans are all required to pitch in with taxes. It's in this system that we all have to opt into. And, in the instance of the free market, I mean, sure, people can buy and sell favors in the free market. But the thing about the free market is we don't have to participate in it. But whereas government, it's all mandatory. We have to pitch in for taxes, yet certain people benefit and certain people don't. So just having said that, what are some general thoughts in regards to government, and how did you become an anarchist?
Well, that's a couple of different questions. Let me start with, the government part. I think it's... looking from an outsider's perspective, people will say, but without government, kids would suffer, poor people would suffer, we need to look after the minorities. And actually, I favor all of those arguments. And in fact, I'm in favor of the smallest minority in the world, which is the individual. So the one thing that is actually against the minorities and against the individual is the state, because as you said, it's not a voluntary thing. It just forces you. And, because people, or not people, I'm part of that. We all grow up with this idea of, the contributor, paying your taxes, and that's just what you do. A lot of times we don't think any deeper than that because we are, distracted with all the bells and whistles from, war here, war there, or, this president is doing this, and then another puppet does another thing. So, the state provides services that can be easily provided by the free market. And a lot of people say, well, stop it, because, then the world will be owned by a few corporations. And I think it's easily, we can claim, we can destroy that claim pretty easily. Back in the 1600s, actually the state is the one that was giving permission to the big corporations to just basically pillage and rape all the natural resources and then sell it to people. So the idea that the corporations are the bad guys came from all of that, very early in the enterprises, So, but without protectionist laws, big corporations wouldn't get that big, and if they did, they will fail. And that's one of the things that happened in 07, 08. They were saying, these are too big to fail. In fact, that is one of the things that prevent monstrous organizations from becoming predatory. If they're too big, they will fail. So, that's a natural part of life. Now, that's kind of sort of also how I became a voluntarist. I started paying attention kind of also around 2008, but I have to say that I favored Obama at that time, because if you go back and look at some of the YouTubes from when he was speaking, 06, 07, he sounded very libertarian. So, obviously selling the dream, hope and change and bring troops back home and whatever. Actually, my path to voluntarism happened through entheogens, which is, ayahuasca and San Pedro cactus, which is probably not one thing that you hear all the time, like a lot of people just go through it and then maybe through some hardship or through some actual introspection or through friends or Tom Woods or Ron Paul or whatever. But I was actually doing my yoga certification because I'm also a certified yoga instructor, and one of my teachers was a shaman, and he took me under his wing, and I started learning about shamanism, and that's basically what took me to voluntarism. It was just I was able to just see with a different set of eyes how the world and the universe works, and the people that are in charge are just they're not doing it for the best of everybody else, and so that was basically how it happened.
Yeah. Well, it's powerful, and it's so interesting because I know the government officials and representatives, they like to, if you're not for universal health care, then you must not be for health care. If you're not for a minimum wage, then you're not for higher wages. And it's always like this framed argument. If you're not for the teachers, then you're not for education. If you're not for the government, then you must not like roads, or you must not like a fair judicial system or something like that. It's all these things that make this assumption that if the government didn't exist, then we wouldn't have these things that we all want. But in reality, most people agree that we want health care. We want some sort of roads. We want to be safe, and we want to make sure that we don't get sick if we eat some food from some restaurant that is not taking care of their ingredients. So, so let's just talk about that a little more. Why is the free market the real solution instead of the government?
In my perspective, because it follows natural law. And, like I'm in Texas, and we just had the hurricane stuff happening with our neighbors in Houston. A lot of people that suffered a lot of the damage was because the government promoted flood insurance protection in areas that were in like floodplains. So, like any kind of natural organization that is not influenced by the state would say, hell no, because, that's just a losing game if I am suddenly having to insure houses that are going to be very likely flooded, so a lot of the central planning, for instance, all those hugely bright minds from the government, right? They have all these wonderful ideas of how to make cities and whatnot, and they do them in floodplains. So, that's just one example out of 50 million that I can give. And, other things like you mentioned, healthcare. Most people, I have to believe, are good people, and they want to take care of other people. One of the reasons why healthcare here in the United States is so expensive is because of government overreach. I was looking at some charts, and I saw that the number of doctors in the United States is just, growing very slowly. What has been causing higher costs is too many administrative people working. So I have a friend that's actually doing coding for doctors, and she's saying that there's so many people needed for all of these healthcare insurance plans and whatever, and the way that they sell it and buy insurance. The whole thing is so constipated and convoluted that they just need so much money to be able to keep up with this. It's not normal. It's not natural. Gosh, I'm 34, and I remember when I was, 10, maybe smaller than that, I had relatives that would go to Houston to get procedures done because it was cheaper and it was better and it was faster, and you take that back in history too. We used to have amazing healthcare. People from all over the world would come here. It's not the case anymore. It's still pretty amazing, but it's like the service is like going downhill because a lot of times the doctors have their hands tied on payment procedures. When I go to the doctor, I tell them I'm paying cash, and I immediately get anywhere between 30 to 70% off on discounts when I pay cash. That's just crazy to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, it is so manipulated. I mean, just think about the loans that are given to people going to school for worthless degrees versus the same amount of money being lent to people who are going to be doctors and lawyers and engineers. But there's no oversight. There's no investment mindset behind that because the government isn't there to make a rational economic decision. And I saw some meme. This reminded me a couple days ago. It showed a government employee having a customer walk up to them, and over his head it said, "Oh, great, more work." And then next to it, you had a free market corporation with a customer walking in front of him. And it said, the meme on top of the cashier said, "Great, more money." And that's the incentive in the free market. The government, more work and, a misallocation of capital. In the free market, there's an incentive to thrive and to get better. And there's just a rising tide that lifts all boats. So, Luis, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that. And I'd like to get into sound money as our next topic, but feel free to respond.
Yes, I mean, the whole idea is we want to create value. And that's just our natural, I mean, we're wired to explore, to grow, to create, and that's our natural human form. Whenever the state takes over, it's a form of like a caste that prevents your whatever body part from growing, when you're little. It just like stifles it so much, and because it's moving nature away from the way it needs to be, so it becomes toxic, and a lot of people just become entitled. It's not working the way it ought to be working, right? So yeah, I totally agree. And gosh, you talked about the school system. I remember my dad. He was telling me he started working when he was 6 years old to be able to help with family issues because his dad got sick and all that stuff. He put himself through college. And he didn't have any loans of any kind, I mean, gosh, like that's probably the last generation that we will ever hear, going through that kind of stuff, unless, we go back to some free market situation. And tuition is so expensive because of that same meddling of the state. So I am a firm believer that the free markets make things cheaper, faster, and better.
Mm. Well, I'm a believer, and I totally agree with you, especially with the traditional college system. But oh my gosh, I mean, look what we have with the internet. Education is essentially free. Now, going back to that mentality, or proving my point, as kind of like we were talking about before, where just because the government is running the college programs now, that doesn't mean there's no benefit in being in an environment where someone teaches you. That's probably better than trying to learn on your own in front of a computer. But the internet is putting a lot of pressure on the current conventional system, especially as it continues to get more and more expensive. So I'm of a firm belief that the college education system is going to blow up. And especially us as millennials, we're to the point now where we've had a bad experience with college. People are graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and in a lot of cases not having much to show for it. So we're not going to see a college degree on someone's resume the same way previous generations did, and I think that's going to change as time goes on here. Anything else before we move on, Luis?
Yeah, absolutely. There is something called academic inflation. I'm from Mexico City. And, a lot of people, especially people that haven't traveled, they say, Mexico sucks, this and that. But what's funny about it is that we have cab drivers with engineering degrees and doctorate degrees because, since everybody and their moms have, at least in the big cities, a college degree, then they start losing value. So even then, if everybody has a college degree, what used to get you a job with just a bachelor's, now you will need a master's or a doctorate or some sort of specialty. So they're becoming meaningless, or they're losing value. one thing that you mentioned, and that's pretty awesome, there's a handful of wonderful Ivy League universities that are giving out their content for free, like MIT, Harvard, and a couple others. You're not going to get a certificate. You're not going to get, the fancy fun fairs at the end, but you will get that education. And there are a growing number of enterprises hiring people with experience versus a college degree. Ernst Young is one of the biggest consulting firms, and those guys are actually taking people with experience versus like just a fancy, shiny piece of paper. So, yeah.
Well, there's going to be a shortage of workers as people get to the point where college is too expensive. Shortage of quote unquote qualified workers with the degrees that they're looking for. And eventually things will have to change. There's a breaking point for anything. And eventually companies will say, hey, well, you know what? We're not going to necessarily say that this is what needs to be required for someone to work for us if the bar needs to be lowered. And I don't think the free market is going to let them down. And I think new avenues and the water will roll around the barriers and find a way down the hill. And so one of the things that we're seeing that with here in the free market in regards to sound money is cryptocurrency. I mean, look how cryptocurrency is totally usurping the banking industry, governments, and especially these governments that are collapsing around the world, Cyprus, Greece, Argentina, Venezuela, people able to move their wealth and turn their phones on the other side of the border and transfer wealth out of the boundaries, out of the confinements of a failing economic system. And you know what? I want to get your thoughts in general when it comes to sound money. I'm sitting here. I just bought some novelty notes out of Zimbabwe, $100 trillion note, $50 billion, $20 billion notes. And I just bought it just for fun. And, it reminded me why it's important to save a certain amount of my money in things that have real value, like a house, like precious metals, like a company that produces real revenue, just things that aren't backed by solely the good faith of the US dollar. So I know that was a long extended question, but Luis, just kind of take that where you will.
Yeah, it's a huge difference between assets and liabilities. So a lot of times people think, well, I have 2 cars and I have a boat and I have a house. Most times those things are liabilities because they're not paid off most times, The real assets would be stuff that you can hold, or, in this case, Bitcoin, you can't. But the point is, I love gold and silver, and I buy a little bit every month with the intention of using that, retirement / leaving it behind for my kids. And I also do Bitcoin. Now, there's something like you mentioned, like fiat currency means so be it, let it be. And basically just out of faith, they're telling you this piece of 98% cotton, 2% paper with some ink is worth $100. So be it. There's nothing to back it up. No gold, no nothing. And people just go about, I have some of those in my pocket too. That's how we trade. But the way I see it is like, when I need money, I withdraw some Bitcoin and suddenly I get some funny money with some, dead United States statemen, and I feel like I'm in the fair, like giving real money and they give you tokens, and then you're like suddenly, buying all that you need. That's kind of what it feels like to me. But I think that, even though I'm a huge proponent of silver and gold, I think that Bitcoin is just a game changer. It has all the properties of gold, with the exception of the physical ones. But like as a money, it's fantastic, and it's a disruptive energy. And what I mean by that is it's a game changer. It's here to just get rid of, basically take the power away from the guys that want to control us. And it's doing it, and they're getting pissed, and that's why they're trying to enact laws against it. But they don't even understand it. They don't even know how it works. And I was actually just watching some video, and the United Nations, they were saying they were pretty scared that North Korea was actually creating money because they were strapped, by mining Bitcoin. And, I'm not a fan of North Korea, but the point I'm trying to make is it's taking the power away from the United Nations and from the big banks that are in bed with the state, and all of those things are, for instance, the whole situation with Venezuela is they're not going into the hole just because they're socialists. They're going into the hole because the United Nations and the big banks are putting a heart attack into their banking, and they're making nobody, they're prohibiting trade with these guys. Now, if you're not using dollars, if you're not using banknotes from any part of the world, and you're using free money like Bitcoin or Ethereum or any other cryptocurrency, you are actually free to trade, and you're not paying that interest to this horrible middleman.
Yeah, Luis, good points on that. You know what? I want to talk a little bit about the difference between precious metals and Bitcoin, though, because if you're a real, like we all are, I mean, we have to really look at our finances and make a decision with what we're going to do. Watching Bitcoin do what it does, it is very volatile, and I understand you can't just put your faith in it the way you would precious metals. I mean, I think you almost can ask anybody, what do you have more confidence in putting your money in right now? $1 million in gold or Bitcoin, especially when Bitcoin was at $5,000, a week ago. And I think most people would agree that, the confidence of the volatility is probably safer in, gold's long 5,000 year history of being wealth storage. And even going back, I mean, when Bitcoin was $1, $30, $50, there's no time in history when people weren't questioning its value, right? And even a guy like Roger Ver, who, put $25,000 in it in its early stages, and became this crypto millionaire. I mean, he wasn't putting in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, he dipped his toe in it, and it changed his life. So I guess I've been asking you a lot of long questions, man. I apologize for that. But I guess what I'm asking is, what should people's approach to investing in cryptocurrency or Bitcoin with the volatility that we're seeing, especially, as of lately?
Okay, well, the very first difference between crypto and precious metals, I don't see gold as an investment right off the bat. I see gold as insurance. It's a way to protect your money. It's a way to also take it away from the hands of those that want to take it from you. I see it as money. Now, with Bitcoin, yes, it's volatile, and it's a new kind of technology, and just like any kind of new technology, sometimes, it's kind of hard to keep up with it. You have to get really into it. My sense is, if you told me today, here's your $1 million invested either in gold or Bitcoin, without a doubt, I would go Bitcoin. And I'll tell you why.
Wow, okay.
I think, I love gold, right? But I will not make money on gold because, the price of it is being manipulated too by the Fed. And they're forcing JP Morgan to short silver and to short gold just to kind of keep the price stuck at that level. Finally, we saw it rising a little bit higher than, its normal peak. But Bitcoin is going to go down to $3,000 and then is going to climb back up to about $4,000. It's interesting because Bitcoin likes round numbers. And as you see the trends, you will notice. So once it goes back up to 4,000, that's going to be a couple of weeks or so, maybe a little more. You can make, a decent chunk of cash there. And then it's going to go back down to another, 3,000, 2,800. And then it's going to go back up to, 6, 7, 8,000. Now, the idea here is, I would suggest that you don't invest more than you're willing to lose, right? Now, that doesn't sound like, like I'm super faithful to that. But what I'm just saying, I'm not wanting to influence anybody to just, I don't know, bet their house or whatever. But I am very confident that it's a time to hold. And if you bought without selling, you didn't lose anything. It's going to come back up. And it's funny because every year I get people saying, oh, it went back down. It was a scam. It's dying. It's the end of the story. And then the next year, it's 3,000. And the next year is 4,000. So next year around this time, whenever it's $10,000 and it dips again another 2,000, people are going to be the same story. Oh, it died, whatever. In the meantime, I'm laughing, making money, Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's just kind of the way it's been working with Bitcoin. And at some point, there's going to be like a way where, one Bitcoin may be worth $100,000. So it cannot be controlled like it has, like gold, silver, dollars, yens, whatever have been controlled.
Yeah, good point, Luis. And I tend to agree with you in terms of long-term projections on Bitcoin and from an investment perspective. And part of the insurance portion of the gold argument is that gold hasn't done what Bitcoin's done. But people are going to get excited about gold when gold does eventually do its thing. I'm a firm believer that it's not always going to be able to be controlled by the central banks and JP Morgan, and gold will have its day in the sun. And we could see moves the way we are seeing in Bitcoin, but at this point it is being heavily suppressed, and I agree with you on that. And speaking of bankers, I just want to get your thought on this. A few years ago, we put out, our group here at Crush the Street, we put out a video. We called it Banker's Worst Fear. We called Bitcoin Banker's Worst Fear. And here we have Jamie Dimon commenting on Bitcoin, saying that it's fraud, saying that, his traders would be stupid to be dabbling in Bitcoin and that it's going to completely blow up. And, kind of as a closing discussion here, what are your general thoughts on, the remarks that Jamie Dimon had on Bitcoin and, what it's doing to the market?
There's something called a self-fulfilling prophecy. And, when you put expectations out in the world, because that's how it works, right? People start to buy them, and then it happens. So it's not magic. What he's trying to do is he's trying to influence people because he has so much influence. He's trying to put that out there, not in the sense of like him having a magic ball and actually seeing what's going to happen, but he's afraid and terrified of losing his stake of influence in the world, because without the power structure that the state offers to him, he will have nothing. Like there is something that I really liked from Ludwig von Mises, and he says, he who cannot serve his fellow men wants to rule them. And that's what these guys want to do, because they are unable to offer a legitimate service. Like, I mean, the banking, we're using the same banking stuff that has always happened, and there are about almost 8 billion people on this planet. And the actual banking system only helps about 1.5 or 2 at most. What happens with the other 5 or 6 billion people? The cool thing about Bitcoin is that you are not going to need an ID. You do not need a passport. You don't need a proof of residence to open a bank account. With Bitcoin, all you need is a smartphone. And most people in most countries are getting, they'll call it a cheap phone. That's fine, but they have the access to that banking and that service for very, very cheap. And to me, that's like zooming out, looking at that beautiful picture, that's the smell of victory.
Wow. Wow, Luis. Those are good words there. And I think I was talking to Trace Mayer, and he was telling me, and pointing out the cost of a bank account in some African nations is just more expensive than having a smartphone. And all you need nowadays, as you pointed out, to have Bitcoin is a smartphone. And especially in these areas with high capital controls and major economic distortions, you're better off. You're better off with cryptocurrency than you are with your traditional banking system locked into a government that otherwise shouldn't be trusted. So, you know what? I got to tell you, I greatly enjoyed this talk with you. We're right about at the 30-minute mark. I want to give you an opportunity here for some closing comments on what we talked about, and then, let everyone know where they can find your work and all the great things that you're doing.
Thank you. All I want, like my personal mission, is to empower people and to be present. So with that in mind, that's the passion that fuels me to be able to do all the activism, all the writing, all the interviews, all the stuff that I do. So in my perspective, I'm trying to help people live a freer life, and that's where I'm coming from. So that's where I try to vouch for either technologies or ways to help people achieve that. As you mentioned at the very beginning, it's emancipatedhuman.com. I also have the same on Facebook, Emancipated Human, YouTube the same, and Twitter as well. And one of the cool things is, like, I am also a leadership development consultant, and I get to teach voluntarism in the corporate world. And it's amazing because a lot of people always bash, big corporations, and I'm not saying the banking ones, I don't work there, but normal corporations, because most businesses are corporations. So I take this to I guess I don't want to call clients names, but to big ones, in the Forbes 100 best companies to work for. And the reason why they're so successful and so wealthy is because they're using the skills that we teach, the Googles and all of these wonderful enterprises. So I think that's it, and I'm super appreciative for the opportunity, sir.
Well, hey, Luis, you were a great guest, and you had shared a lot of amazing information, and I highly encourage anyone who hasn't visited your website to visit your website and to check out all the stuff that you're doing. So thanks again for coming on the show with me today.
I'm so appreciative. Thank you, sir.